Good morning, everybody. We want to welcome you to today's webinar, a fun topic I'm sure many of you have already been thinking about, and that's getting ready for year end. So year-end preparation is always a big deal. For dealers particularly, there's a lot going on. Sometimes it's a busy time in your office or in your dealership, and we know that you've still got to get really ready to help with the year-end close. So before we jump right into the content, I'm going to cover a little bit of our housekeeping steps. I know many of you have been on our webinars, but anytime today throughout the webinar, you'll see at the bottom of your window, there's a Q&A button. If Brian's presenting, talking about something and it sparks a question, go ahead and type in your question immediately. We're super fortunate today that we have some very tenured light speeders with us to also assist with the Q&A. You can see we've got Dan and Porter and Steve on our panel today. They'll be answering questions and they'll be available even at the end as we do our live Q&A to address any questions you might have. So feel free to type in those questions and hopefully we can really help you get ready for year end. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to today's presenter, Brian Tierney. So thanks, Brian.
Well, thanks, Diana, and thanks, folks, for joining us once again for another Wednesday webinar as we head towards year end. Hard to believe 2025 is just about to wrap up, and 2026 is knocking on the door, which is really why I think we're all here today. So thanks for taking some time to join us on a year-end overview in Lightspeed. And for those of you that haven't met me before on a webinar, my name is Brian Tierney. I'm a software solutions consultant here with Lightspeed, coming to you with a little over 30 years Lightspeed experience now, 16 years in a dealership, and now 15 years with the Lightspeed organization. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking some time on Wednesday webinars with us here at Lightspeed. With that, as I was preparing some content for today's webinar and kind of thinking in my mind and trying to wrap my head around the fact that 2025 is about to come to a close. Well, first of all, I started singing that song in my head, an old REM song, which I won't labor you with today, but it is ringing through my head today. The end of the world as we know it, or something like that. But anyway, I was putting together some thoughts and putting together the PowerPoint and some content to speak about today. And Hal Borland's a quote came to mind that really speaks to the sentiment of closing out the year and maybe ringing in the new year. And so I think today, as we go through the demonstration, really the goal is to talk about how do we manage our business when it comes to closing out the year? What are the things we should think about, whether at a high level or even in a more in-depth level? But at the underlying tone is that we're completing year end and we're moving forward for bigger and better is really the goal. So with all of that in mind, for today's agenda, I've got a number of things we're going to talk about. We're going to start by talking about the inventory valuation report, where it is and what it does and why it's important. We're going to talk a little bit about the parts physical inventory count. I'll make a reference to another webinar we did earlier in the year that'll go into more detail about parts physical inventory counting, and why it's poignant for today's meeting is many of our businesses, including businesses that I used to work for, do their physical inventory count right about this time of year. Sadly for me, Christmas time was always a great time of year with family, but it was always a time of year that we were counting parts. So keep that in mind as we go through this discussion today. You might be in the middle of that. You might be thinking about it. We'll go through some management activity and journal entries. We're going to look at the trial balance. We're going to look at some reconciliation of your scheduled accounts. And then we'll wrap things up at the end with what is the actual year-end procedure that we need to consider. Everything that leads us up to that is preparing us for that moment together. So we'll get to that point. And then, of course, throughout today's webinar, as Diana had mentioned, there are some folks that are sitting by waiting to take your questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. So please send your questions to those folks. They're waiting to help you out. We'll take some questions live at the end of the presentation, and we'll give you some things to consider and think about as you're moving towards your year end to wrap up. So with that, the parts or the inventory valuation report, we'll get to parts inventory in a moment, but the inventory valuation report is really an all-encompassing report that shows you not only parts inventory, but major unit inventory. It shows you your labor values. It shows parts that are sold to repair orders. It shows a all-encompassing inventory value for what's going on in the business. I want to show you where it's located in the system so that you can make sure that you're running it. And it's a good practice for you not only to run it, but also to maybe save a PDF copy somewhere safe on a computer, keep it safe, and maybe a reference for you in the future. And a lot of times once we've completed year end and we've completed our physical inventory count, it's a good practice to look at what did inventory look like before the count and what does it look like after. It's sometimes interesting just to see those variances. So let's take a look at what that report looks like, where it's located, and then maybe how to save it should you want to save it or print it if you need to. So we're going to go into Lightspeed. I want to point that it's in an area of the system that some of you may be familiar with. We'll talk more in depth about what management activity is in just a moment. But we go into management activity and I select inventory valuation report. Now, in this context, I'm just going to go ahead and run the report. And as I run the report, I'm going to start to see the data on the screen, which, of course, I can just review it. I can see the data. And of course, I can also save it. If I want to save a copy, I can save a PDF version of this to my computer, to my laptop. I can even email a copy to somebody else in the business. But I do recommend that you get a copy of this in some fashion before you start your counts and before you complete your year-end process, so you have a reference to look at in the future. It's kind of interesting to see, if nothing else, at the end. So with that, just to give you a sense of where the report is, here's your inventory valuation report. It's going to give you a rundown by category what your inventory value is. You can even schedule this, and it's a good practice to even schedule this to run at the end of the month. Add this to your month-end repertoire. We'll talk a little bit about month-end in just a moment, but you can schedule this to say if you want to run it at month-end, you select month. I want it to run on the last day of the month, and Lightspeed's smart enough to know that some months don't have 31 days in them. So if I select 31 and there's only 28 days, Lightspeed knows it just runs on the last day of the month, and I recommend running it at, say, 11:30 p.m. at night, because hopefully everybody's gone home by then and they're not cashiering anything after that time of day. And then click OK, and that report is now going to be scheduled to run. We'll talk about scheduling reports in more depth in just a little bit. But that's inventory valuation. Now let's talk about another element of inventory, and that's the part's physical inventory count. Now, as mentioned, we did a webinar that features the physical inventory count process a few months ago, and I'll show you some places a little bit later in the webinar where you can reference that should you want to. The most common, the most popular physical inventory count process these days is to use a barcode scanner. Lightspeed does provide an alternative solution, our count sheet reporting tools, which is a little bit more what I was used to back in the dealership days, where I would print off a report, put it on a clipboard, walk around the shop with a number 2 pencil and count my inventory. So whether you're doing it that way, which is perfectly great, or you're using a physical scanner, whether it's your phone, the mobile application, or you're using an inventory scanner that you might have gotten from Amazon, a laser scanner that last I checked started about $70 per unit, and those are available in a variety of ways on Amazon. Whether you're doing either of those things, let's walk through the physical inventory count process briefly and just talk about what it looks like and things to consider as you're using the barcode scan process. So let's go back to Lightspeed. And first, for those of you that aren't familiar with the Lightspeed mobile application, just know that it's available to you for your Apple, your Android device, tablet, or cell phone, and it's free. So go ahead and go to your App Store, your Google Play Store, download the app. If you need some assistance with credentials and getting access to your server and therefore your data, your store admin should be able to help you out with that. If you need additional help, you can reach out to our support team who's standing by to help you out with those things. We'll talk more about support and other resources in just a moment. But as you walk around the shop with either the Lightspeed mobile application or a Motorola or a similar barcode scanner for inventory, in the mobile app, I'm going to press the scan inventory button, walk around the shop and scan all the barcodes on the products that's in my back room, on my parts counter, on the sales floor. And as I scan those items, the Lightspeed mobile application or your barcode scanner is going to save that into a cache memory. You'll come back to your computer, and if you're using an external scanner, you'll lay that into the cradle. You'll come into your Lightspeed parts menu. You'll go to inventory updating. You'll select scanned inventory. And if that scanner is sitting in its cradle, you'll hit the download scanner button, or if you're using the mobile application, you're going to pull the detail from the mobile app. It'll then load this screen with all the part numbers you've counted, along with the counts that you've physically counted. It's going to show you what the old count is, what the system currently records in terms of on-hand values, and it's going to show what you physically counted. And you're going to see there's going to be some variance there. It's also going to show some other details. The white lines indicate that Lightspeed recognizes those parts. The purple lines indicate, well, that part isn't in your parts inventory for some reason, but I know what it is because it's in price books. That's going to be lit up in this kind of purple color. Yellow indicates that we got a part from, maybe we get it from two or three different suppliers. They happen to use the same part number. We have to tell Lightspeed which supplier we want it to update. And sometimes I'm going to scan something that Lightspeed has absolutely no idea what it is because everything in the world has a barcode scan attached to it or a barcode label. I can scan virtually anything, and Lightspeed scanners are going to read it. It'll dump it into the screen, and we have to tell the system what it is. Maybe this is a widget, has a cost of $2 and a selling price of $3, whatever the case. We're going to have to manually update. Now, when I hit my update inventory button, my new counts are going to replace my old counts. And I'm going to say at that point, you're also going to want to run your adjustment report, your parts inventory adjustment report. So you go to parts, you'll go to reports, you'll go into parts inventory adjustment. Here we go. And we're going to want to look at not purchase orders, but we're going to want to look at barcode counts. So we're going to run that based on the date range, run the report, and then maybe save a copy or print a copy should you want to. We'll talk about reconciliation a little bit later in the discussion. But as you're preparing for your parts physical inventory count, if you need additional details, considering the amount of time we have available to talk today, we didn't go very much depth, but if you're looking for additional details and resources for your parts physical inventory count, do go to our YouTube channel. Check out Lightspeed. Go to Mastering Inventory Management with Lightspeed. That's our most recent video that goes into more depth with that process. Check out that video. It's just about 40 minutes long, so there's a lot of information there. It'll answer any questions you might have about that physical count process. So with that, the next thing I'm just going to introduce in terms of closing out the year, even related to month-end procedures, is management activity. Now, a couple things to consider with management activity. I think of it as the gateway to accounting. So all the transactions that are happening on the parts, service, sales, even rental side of your business flow through management activity to then be posted to the general ledger, to be maybe creating payables, to create receivables. And as it flows through management activity does a little bit of a check to verify that everything is correct. Sometimes it finds things that are wrong, and the green, the red, and even the yellow dots that this page is referencing are indications of the status of those transactions as they flow through management activity. But let's take a look in practice as to what management activity looks like and maybe even resolve an error together. So we're going to go to management activity. I'm going to go to plural, management activities. And as I pull open this screen, before I get to the detail, I want to point to the red and green dots that my previous slide was pointing to. If I can spit something out there. Bottom of the screen, there's a red light. And if I click on that red light indicator, it tells me that I've got some management activity errors in the system. If you don't have a red light, everything's green, everything's go, everything's normal. You might even have a yellow indicator. That's a warning. We don't see those very often, but red lights are things that for today's demonstration, for today's presentation, you want to address those before you complete your month end, because if those are in error, those are transactions that have not yet posted to your general ledger and therefore are not going to show up as part of your year end. They're not going to show up on your financials. And they might also leave breaks throughout some of the reports that we're going to look at a little bit later. And I'll explain the breaks, but let's talk about an error. So I'm going to uncheck the successful documents box, which is going to reveal just the erroneous documents. And I'm going to highlight one in particular, the parts invoice that's sitting at the very top of the screen. Now, for the front end user, when they sold this part over the parts counter, this is what that invoice would look like and the transaction would look like. We've got a customer, we've got a part number, we've got a quantity sold, we've got a method of payment that was collected, taxes, etc. Everything looks completely fine at this point, and it's not the fault of the person making the sale. So I want to make that clear. Nobody made a mistake here. The mistake happens to be that there's something that's incomplete on the back end. What is that thing that's incomplete on the back end? Well, since we know there's an error, if I go to the top of the screen and I hit this little down arrow next to my retry button, I'm going to get a little hyperlink that gives me a bit of an indication as to where in the system I need to address the error. But before we get to that, let's look at the accounting detail associated to this parts invoice. When I open up the detail, I see all of the GL accounts, the inventory accounts, the cost of goods, the revenue accounts, the tax accounts that were impacted or have yet to be impacted as that transaction was completed. And if I go to the very bottom of this screen, I can see some of the error detail. What is the problem with this document? Why is it in error? Well, it's a setup error. And that's just a mistake. When we were setting up this particular supplier or this category, we forgot something. And what we forgot for a sale type called customer taxable, we left out the cost of goods account for a sales category called DMO. Well, let's take a look at how do we address that. So back on the management activity screen, if I hit my little hyperlink, it takes me to the place in the system where the error lives, and we know it's related to the GL interface. And we saw, based on the verbiage in the error message, that it was related to cost of goods, and that's at the bottom of this sales category setup. If I highlight tax, customer taxable, which is the sale type that's being impacted, and we know it's a parts sale, so parts department, we've got a revenue account in place. I've got an inventory account in place, so we're 2/3 of the way there, but I need to get all the way there. And I'm going to input a cost of goods account, which is probably going to mirror in some ways the revenue account. We can see 46,500-40. For revenue, well, chances are if we go 66,500-40, that very well could be the GL account for cost of goods. And it looks like parts other product sales and parts other product cost of goods. Those make a little bit of sense to me. So I'm going to click save. In fact, now that I've saved that, and now we seem to have all the appropriate GL accounts in place for this category, let's come back to management activity. We've still got our error highlighted. I'm going to retry it, which is going to now post that transaction to the GL, and we've cleared out an error together. And you can see that I've got a little bit of work to do, several other errors that I need to complete, but you'll want to make sure that you do very much like what we just did together collectively on each of those lines, and chances are the solution I showed you will resolve the rest of the errors that might be in your system. So once you've resolved those, we can move on to maybe the next step in the process. And that is making sure that all of your bank deposits and your clearing accounts are cleared. And how I look at those, we're going to go right into a cash on hand account that lives on your general ledger, and we want to make sure that your month to date and year to date balances are zero. And if they are, then we know our bank deposits are complete. If they're not, then we're going to want to look through the history and find out what days did we skip over, because it is important for the year end and for your financial reports to reflect the specific days that the bank deposit really should have occurred, as opposed to one complete bank deposit at the end. You never want to do one massive bank deposit because it's really going to skew your numbers. So try as best you can to review the history, go through and make any missing bank deposits that associate to missing dates. We'll talk about where those are and how to see them. And then you'll want to review your clearing accounts and make sure that those balances are zero. And as we get towards the end of our presentation, I'll give you some references to where if they're not zero balances on some of these clearing accounts, how do you address them? Since we're limited on time today, there's a variety of variables that may contribute to why those balances exist, and there's a variety of variables that you can apply to resolving them. And I'll give you some references on how to do that a little later. But let's take a look at where I'm referring to in the Lightspeed system. If I pull Lightspeed back up on the screen here, we're going to go to General Ledger. And I'm going to go right into the chart of accounts, and I want to point to our cash on hand account. And for those that are using the standard chart of accounts, standard being the GL accounts that we most commonly use when we're setting up a Lightspeed database, your cash on hand account is probably 20,100. If you're using something different, it may be a different account number, but the description should be listed as cash on hand. Well, you can see in my case, I've got a month to date and a year to date balance that's actually fairly significant. So I've got some work to do. I've got some history to review, and I've got some bank deposits to create so that we can clear those balances before I complete my month end or my year end as well. Now, if I go into the cash on hand account, I can review the history, and I might see dates that are missing based on bank deposits. I can look at specific months, specific days, but this would be a great reference to find out where the gaps are and then address those accordingly. So let's go over to management activity and bank deposits, and this is where I'm going to create those bank deposits. I'm just going to click new, add the applicable date, add a bank deposit, and process that based on those individual dates. And again, I want to make sure that I'm not doing one massive bank deposit. I want to do those for the applicable dates or as closely as I can so that my financials will reveal data that actually makes sense. Back to the other function that we want to take a look at, that's your clearing accounts. And if you're using standard chart of accounts, the ones that we most often use when we're taking a dealer live, those generally live in your 22,900 range. Those are kind of where your clearing accounts live. And if you go in and see a month to date or a year to date balance that is not zero, well, you've got some clearing to do. And back to giving you some references, some documents on how to address those. I'll provide those at the end of the demonstration that'll give you some ways that if you've got a balance in there, you're not sure what to do with it, show you some ways to do it. So let's remove that from the screen and we'll move on to the next step. And the next step in this process is financial reconciliation, your bank reconciliation. So whether it's your banks, your credit cards, your investment accounts, after you've completed all of your bank deposits, that's going to be key. You want to make sure all your bank deposits are fully posted before you do any of this stuff as we're approaching year end. Then we can do our final bank reconciliation, credit card, investment account reconciliation before we do our final year end process. And as we do, I'll show you where those live inside of the system. And again, it's going to be critical that you complete all your bank reconciliations or your bank deposits rather before you do this. So let's go back into Lightspeed here. You probably know if you've been doing this before, general ledger. We're going to go to bank reconciliation. This is going to pull up all your financial accounts, your banks, your credit cards, your investment accounts that you use to buy goods and services for your business. Now, if I select my most often used bank, this is my default bank, and underneath these financial account lists is going to be a list of all of the reconciliations. You can't delete any of them; they're always going to be there. But I like to sort by statement date, which puts my most recent one at the top. And in this case, I've only got one, so that makes it pretty easy for me. But if I open up my most recent bank reconciliation, I can go and review and see all of the times we use that bank to buy goods and services, pay for flooring, buy parts, buy pizza for the shop. And I'm going to check the box for the thing that have cleared my most recent bank or credit card statement or investment account statement. Check the boxes for the things that showed up on those statements. And in terms of bank deposits, every time I took money to the bank or recorded a bank deposit, those will all show up there if they haven't been reconciled yet as well. Or payments to credit cards, or maybe even journal entries if I'm making journal entries. I'm going to check those boxes, leave the boxes unchecked for those that haven't cleared. My ending statement balance should match my my physical printed copies or digital copies of statement balances, and I should have an unreconciled value that's zero. I've got some work to do in this place as well. Then I click save and I've finalized maybe my last bank reconciliation for the year prior to doing our next step. Now, the next step is we're going to take a look at our trial balance. Now, based on some of the things we've already completed, correcting some of those management activity errors, for example, maybe even related to clearing accounts, but generally it's going to be related more to the errors because things haven't posted appropriately. If there's an error in management activity, we may see an out of balance in our trial balance. Now, if you run your trial balance and everything's in balance, great. But oftentimes, if you run it and you find out there's a value, positive or negative, that you're out of balance, it could be related to management activity errors, or it could be related to an out of balance somewhere else. And the next step, we're going to look at reconciling some of your scheduled accounts. But let's take a look at the trial balance and what you should look for before you proceed with that. So let's jump back into Lightspeed. We're going to go to General Ledger. We're going to come down to reports, and I'm going to go right into my trial balance. And as I run this report, I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom of the consolidated portion, which is all of my departments combined, parts, service, sales, rental, F&I, whatever my department descriptions are. It gives me my total values. And as I scroll down to the bottom, this is going to give me a sense of if I'm in balance or not. Do my debits equal my credits or vice versa? And unfortunately, I am out of balance. So I've got a little bit of work to do. Now, as we already know, because I showed you my management activity errors, it could be those errors that are sitting there that could be contributing to this out of balance. So I want to make sure that I address all of those. But if I have addressed all of those, what else could be contributing to it? Well, we're going to take a look at what could be contributing to it too. Next, let's take a look at some other additional resources that are available, reconciling some of your scheduled accounts. And what are scheduled accounts? Well, your major unit inventory accounts, your accounts payable accounts, your accounts receivable accounts. Well, let's show you where those reconciliation reports live and some things to consider as you're running them and checking to see if you're in balance. And the good news is if you do run those reports and they're empty, sometimes you run a report and it's empty, and that might be a concern. That might be, well, there's a problem. If I'm not seeing data, I'm concerned. I'm not seeing something. The good news is in this case, if you've got an empty report, that's a good sign. You're in a good place. But if you do have some detail on that report, you might have a little bit of work to do. Let's take a look at those reports together. Now, before I get to that, I will mention there are some resources we'll refer to a little later on how to reconcile your scheduled accounts. We'll make mention to some subsidiary reports that you should look at. Maybe even schedule those reports so they run automatically for you. We'll talk about scheduling in just a second. On rare occasions, and there's a little bit of a footnote here at the bottom of my slide, schedule adjusting journal entries could be a way that you're going to resolve some of your out of balances. But I will caution you on that. Basically, your scheduling adjusting journal entry is a one-sided journal entry, and they can fix things, but they can also cause more problems. So be careful on using that. I would urge you, if you have questions or if you're not sure, if you've done all of your positive negatives, you've made all of your customer memos, credit or debit memos to fix AR, you've made offsetting entries in accounts payable to correct AP or major units, and things are still just not balancing right for whatever reason, schedule adjusting journal entries may be the solution. But if you have some concerns or you want to talk to somebody in support, please reach out to them before you do anything regarding schedule adjusting journal entries, because it could put you in a worse place if you get too crazy with those than you started. So keep that in mind, but it may well be the solution you're looking for to fix those out of balances. But let's go back into Lightspeed. We're going to go to General Ledger. We're going to come to Reports, and we're going to go into Reconciliation, and there are three: AR, AP, and MU. Now, if I select one of those three, I will also see my scheduled accounts at the very top, and I can pick and choose what schedule account that I want to review, or I may just want to review them all. I am going to embarrass myself today, and if I am the administrator for this business, I'm going to reveal lots of problems that I have. In fact, look, it shows right now that I've got some out of balances in accounts receivable. Again, if I run this report and it's blank, sometimes that causes alarm in folks' heart. I know it does for me when I run a report and something doesn't come up on the screen. And that's a good thing in this case, but in this case, yeah, I've got an out of balance. I've got something I need to address, and I might address that by using a customer memo, looking through my subsidiary reports and trying to find out what matches and what doesn't, and then making an adjustment in a debit or credit memo associated to that AR account. I'll make references to some of those reports and additional resources for that in a moment. But I'm going to do the very same thing for accounts payable and major unit. I'm going to go to reports. I'm going to go to reconciliation, run my AP. I can pick and choose specific scheduled accounts, or in this case, all. Run the report and reveal that I've got some problems here, some out of balances. I may go in and make an offsetting entry. Hopefully that will fix me. If it doesn't, it may be still related to some of those management activity errors that we had, but if all of those have been addressed and all of my positive and negative AP invoices are just not fixing the issue, I might use a schedule adjusting journal entry. Again, caution you on that. The last thing I'm just going to show you is major unit reconciliation. Same situation as I run that report, if I can grab it. If the report's blank, well, then I'm good to go. But if it's not, which it isn't in my case, I might have some work to do. Management activity errors, make an offsetting entry in accounts payable, or schedule adjusting journal entry if that's my last resort. So things to consider as you're reconciling those accounts. So once we've reconciled our accounts and those reports are now blank, which blank reports in this context are good, that's what we want to see, we're going to go through some year-end processing. So we finally arrived at a point where it's time to do that. And one thing to consider, and as I was preparing for today's webinar, I was going through some of our sample databases and trying to find a year-end process button that had not been hit yet. And we've got a lot of folks that are playing around in our sample databases, so I've got a screen that I'm going to show you that it looks like somebody has recently pressed our year-end process button. Most of you who are watching this presentation and this webinar, you're going to see a slightly different view than the one I'm going to show you, just slightly, just a color differentiation. We'll talk about that. But what ends up happening as you go through your year-end process is essentially you're going to update your current earnings account. You're also going to update the fiscal year inside of all your GL reporting and on the GL itself. And it's also going to reset the P&L account, set them all to zero. So we'll talk about what that looks like. And then one last little detail that I like to consider when it comes to year end in particular, sometimes I like to consider closing out the accounting date even at month end, but we'll talk about that and some things to consider as you've completed your year end process. So let's go ahead and jump back into Lightspeed here. We're going to go up to the very top of the screen, General Ledger, and I'm going to go to the year-end processing screen. And I made mention that my screen might look a little different than yours, specifically related to this now grayed out button at the top left side of my screen. Well, it shows me that, sometime today, actually, somebody hit that button and reset my fiscal year to 2026, essentially, today. So be careful. Don't hit that button until you're ready. But do hit that button when you are ready, as close as you can to the 1st of January. The closer you can do that to the 1st of January, the better. In other words, if you wait till the 18th of January to post or to hit that button, everything that happened prior to the 18th is still considered technically last year. There might be some subsidiary reports that relate to actual dates, but the GL will see those as last year details. So keep that in mind. Try to do this as close as you can to the beginning of next. And again, what's going to end up happening is it's going to roll your current earnings into your 39,900 account, should you be using the standard chart of accounts, or it will be using your current year's profit and loss account if you're using something else. Also notate that I've got some unposted entries. Now, the yellow indicates that it's not going to force me to post those prior to me pressing my year-end button. It'll let me let those ride if I want to, but what it's pointing to in this context is on the general ledger side is I've got some journal entries that haven't been posted yet. And I can wait to post them if I want to, but I'm probably going to urge you to post those prior to running your end of year. Just simply selecting them, clicking the post journal entries, and then posting those to the GL. Once you've done that, you've posted all your journal entries, your unposted value should be set to 0. Press your year-end button. And once you've done that, maybe the last step in that process is we're going to go to General Ledger, we're going to go to your chart of accounts, and we're going to press the recalculate button. And at that point, it recalculates all the balances and completes that year-end rollover, which now you're into fiscal year, in this case, 2026, or into the next fiscal year. And it's updated all your financial reports as a result. Now, the last thing I mentioned is setting that accounting close date, which happens to live in system preferences. So as you've completed your year-end process, some folks will do this at the end of the month. You don't have to. There's no rule that says you have to, but it's a good practice to do this. And the reason why you might set an accounting close date is because you don't want anybody to backdate something into a prior year or into a prior month. Now, keep in mind, as you set your accounting close date, for our purposes today, we're just going to set it on the 1st of January. So I select that date and I click Save. Now, as I make that selection, at that point, it's going to prevent anybody, even if they have permission to do so, it prevents anybody from backdating into a day prior to that posted date. That closes out accounting so that nobody can muck up my GL based on last year or even last month. And I recommend doing that. That's going to prevent any mishaps from happening in the backside. Now, also consider anybody who has access to this screen can come into this screen, click on that date and delete it and save, and then they can post. So going back to, I don't think we talked about permissions at all, so I can't say going back to. Let's go to permissions. Make sure that only the people that have access to this screen are the people that understand the consequences of removing that value. Okay, so be careful of who has access to your system preferences screen, and I'm sure most of the people on this call today are careful about that. But I just want to set that reminder that once you've removed that date, you do have full reign of posting backwards of that date if you need to. But otherwise, once you've saved that date, it's locking the accounting close date. Okay, important to know about. So I know we went through things rather quickly, given our limited scope and limited time on a webinar. Great references also just to kind of speak to what to look for in the year-end process. And as we kind of conclude, I will give you some references to places in the support portal and other places online that you can get additional details for reconciliation, additional content that as you're preparing for your year-end, some details on the how-to side of reconciliation. And we'll point back to our YouTube channel where you can review that parts inventory count procedure if you want to. But in closing, we went through the inventory valuation report. We talked physical parts inventory counting to some degree. We reconciled some of your financial accounts, or at least made mention of how to do that and some things to look for. We talked about the trial balance. We cleared out a management activity error together, and we made sure that we talked about posting journal entries before completing year end. And with that, I just want to also point to in Lightspeed, if you need additional detail, additional references to some of the subsidiary reports or how-to documentation, you can press the Get Help button at the very top of your screen, which I'd encourage you to do and get familiar with that. And that's going to launch your Lightspeed support portal, where it just so happens that as we're moving towards year end, on the main page, we've got a couple of videos available to you. And these are shorter form videos. I think they're around 5 minutes long, but it talks about the month-end process and a little bit similar detail to what we just spoke about, a little more information there, and year-end process. Great references as you're getting ready for year-end. And if you're looking for a checklist, what report should I run? What steps should I complete? What is the reconciliation process? And give me some how-to tips From that same page, I can click into the document that's going to go down and show me everything we talked about today. And also, if I'm trying to reconcile something, how do I fix a trial balance out of balance? Well, if I click that link, it's going to take me to the how-to document that's going to walk me through those steps. And should you need additional resources or detail from the support portal, if you go to the very top of the screen, a little bit like Chat GPT or Google, you can press the little spyglass button, enter a search query like year-end procedures or month-end procedures, click on that detail. We're going to then give you a document that hopefully gets you back up on your feet and on your way. But if you need additional help, please reach out to our support team. We've got some folks that are standing by to help you with whatever questions or challenges you might have. And with that, just to give you a couple of other references on where to go as you're thinking about closing out the year, or if you'd like news or information about Lightspeed, here's some ways you can connect with us. We've got a LinkedIn, a Facebook, and an Instagram page where we're updating materials every day. So some great information about year end is posted there on a frequent basis, but also news about what's going on with Lightspeed, with some of our vendors and with some of our customers. I would invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Do check us out on our website where we've got a number of resources. You can sign up for upcoming webinars. You can also review previously recorded webinars from our website. Our customer support team is standing by at 800-521-0339, or if you'd like us to set up a demo with folks like me or some of our sales reps here at Lightspeed, we'd be happy to talk to you. Reach out to our sales department with any questions you might have. And at this point, if there's any questions, if I'm brave enough to take some, let's see if we've got some questions we can answer live, Diana.
You bet. I said, thanks so much, Brian. Awesome webinar. So many good points and tips. And thank you to our panel who was answering a lot of questions too. So if you guys even want to turn your cameras back on, we're kind of take a look at some of the questions that came in. You know, they were answering a lot live as it occurred. I think there was one that people were actually looking at how to inactivate an account, Brian, you know, and they answered that question, but maybe it's one that you can show people again as well in Lightspeed.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. It's a great question. Let's go back into Lightspeed here. We're going to go up to General Ledger and we're going to go to Chart of Accounts. And I think the key here is we need to have a $0 balance on one of those accounts. So if I select an account that is applicable, it's $0. If I double click into the detail screen, if I uncheck the box to make that item inactive and save, well, that account still lives in the backside. I could still reactivate it should I need to. It doesn't make it go away. There's no way to effectively delete it at that point. But I can save it and I can reactivate it should I need to. So it makes it go
Perfect.
away and hides it. Yeah.
Perfect. And I think one other key thing that you touched on too, Brian, is like system access and, you know, security, because there's so many things at year end that, of course, we don't want everybody getting into and monkeying with. So I think that was an important area that you touched on as well, just to make sure that we have all the settings set up from a security standpoint.
Absolutely. Yeah. Definitely reconsider your security as you're moving towards year end, especially if we're talking about locking out counting close dates or access to the general ledger for folks that shouldn't have access to that. So consider that. Also, as you're setting up security and permissions for your users, notate that there are some role names on the right side of the screen where if you're not sure what permissions to assign a person, you can use those roles to really guide you through your permission allocation. If you've got a cashier, a part salesperson, a general manager, we give low-level conservative permissions to those roles so that, you know, my opinion is when it comes to permissions, it feels like a reward if I'm granted additional permissions, and it feels like a penalty, or it feels like I'm in trouble when permissions are taken away. So considering conservative permissions attached to those roles, it's always easier to give than to take. So consider that as you're moving towards year end.
Yeah, great tips and pointers. I know we've got the panel of answers back on here too. Is there any other questions you guys saw come in that were maybe something that we want to address to the entire group and just, you know, make sure people are aware of as they get ready for year end? Because lots of detailed questions. And I know some are very unique to an individual customer. You know, you've got something out of balance that might require a call to tech support to actually walk through and understand what's specifically happening for you. Other questions that you guys noticed?
See, there is one that just held in.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a couple more coming in right now too. I know that you guys are answering. Anything else that you saw that you typically have seen as a common support question that maybe we want to address with the whole group?
Oh, should we mention that? Yeah.
I don't know. I would just comment on, you know, not to be afraid of year end, you know, if you're doing your month ends regularly and keeping those closed out, year end is essentially no different, right? We're just closing out a month. And by hitting the button for the year end, we're starting fresh for the new fiscal year. So it's essentially month end. However, your CPA, there might be specific reports that are in addition to what you do in month end. But yeah, just keeping up on your month ends and closing out each month, which a lot of month end can be delegated to your department heads, right? A lot of those reports, like thinking parts or whatnot, your negative on hand quantities, obsolescence reports, staying up on those can, each month your year end's going to be a lot easier. So just want to kind of point that out.
And then I'd also mention that when you run your year-end process, make sure to go into your chart of accounts and hit the recalculate button just as a safety precaution. After you do it, like I say, that takes like 30 seconds for it to run, but just make sure that you do that after you run the year-end process.
Yeah, appreciate that, guys. Great suggestions. Excellent.
And run those regularly if you're adding GLs or any activity in your chart of accounts. Don't ever be afraid to reindex, recalculate, utilizing those tools. So
absolutely. Great
Definitely
point.
did those, Steve.
Yeah, no, I love all those pointers you guys, and I think it's just like, reassurance that it is like month end, but you're doing a little bit more and making sure you're just keeping up on all those processes. And again, like, we're here to help, and there's a lot of resources. Love, Brian, that you pointed out some of those checklists within the technology, the knowledge base. There's a lot of detail there to help you as well. Any other questions we want to capture before we let everybody get back to their Wednesday? Well, appreciate everybody's time today and coming in today. And there's another question coming in. And what we will do today, even with a lot of the questions that came in just through the chat, we're going to take those and put them into a Word document, and you'll see those available along with the recording of the webinar. Because that's just really an important one where year end, I think people want to have a reference back to some more of the Q&A. So we'll make that available as well. So thank you again, Brian, for an excellent webinar.
Well, of
Steve, you
course.
had another comment too?
yeah, just real quick.
You bet.
I've seen a couple with scheduled adjusting journal entries. For those reconciliations, when you run your 3 reconciliation reports, 99% of the time they should be 0. Like you're going to be fine if you stay away from those scheduled journal entries. Do not be utilizing any scheduled adjusting journal entries unless there is out of balance in your reconciliation reports. And even then, if you don't feel confident or it seems confusing, reach out to support to help with those scheduled adjusting journal entries to bring those back in balance. So it's not a tool to use frequently. It should be stay away from it if you can. There's not any reason to be doing those unless we have that reconciliation out of balance. So
yeah, I appreciate you emphasizing that, Steve. And I know we made mention of that in the webinar, that the detail regarding schedule adjusting journal entries, they can cause more problems than they can correct. So tread lightly on those, but they can be a solution in worst case scenario.
Yeah, excellent. And it looks like, Brian, you were going to show something else there on the screen as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to make reference to our webinars page. So at our lightspeeddms.com website, we welcome everybody to check it out. We've got a lot of resources and tools, news and information about Lightspeed, about vendors, about what's going on at our wonderful Salt Lake City office. But in addition to, if you go to the resources tab, select webinars, you will see the current webinar that we're looking at today, but you're also going to see on-demand webinars we've done in the past. If you want to look at parts inventory, if you want to look at anything related to accounting, receivables, accounts payable, or anything related to webinars that we've done historically, this is our library of all of those, and you can click into them, watch them anytime you want to. We've got all of these posted up to our YouTube channel as well, should you prefer that. But we definitely welcome you to check out our on-demand webinars. And as this screen starts to fill up with new detail about webinars for 2026, we encourage you to come back and sign up for those webinars. And we'd love to see you on another Wednesday webinar in the future. So thank you so much.
Excellent. Thanks, Brian. Thank you, panelists. Hope you guys have a very successful year-end close. And remember, reach out to tech support if you have any questions. So thanks, everybody, and have a great Wednesday.
Thanks, everybody.